In this video, I am going to discuss some relevant aspects of moral nihilism. Now, if you are currently sitting in your room contemplating the despair and absurdity of human existence, then you are looking for a video on existential nihilism, which will not be discussed in this video. Moral nihilism is a position in meta-ethics, which is the area of theoretical ethics that deals with questions about the nature of moral facts and properties. As such, two primary concerns within meta-ethics would be whether there are any genuine prescriptive features to the world, and if so, what kinds of things are they? There are different versions of moral nihilism, but all moral nihilists would be committed to at least the following four propositions. First of all, there are no prescriptive or normative moral features to the world at all. There are no moral facts, moral properties, conditions of moral blame or responsibility, etc. This means that nothing is morally right or morally wrong, nothing is morally good or evil, and nothing in the world has any intrinsic moral value or worth. Secondly, none of our moral sentences are true. None of our moral sentences successfully describe the way things are. Thirdly, we have no moral knowledge. Truth is necessary for knowledge, but since the nihilist denies that any of our moral sentences are true, it would follow that none of our moral beliefs count as knowledge. And lastly, according to the nihilist, everything is morally permissible. Since there are no conditions for moral blame or moral responsibility, we are never morally forbidden or morally prohibited for acting in certain ways or for failing to act in certain ways. As far as versions of moral nihilism are concerned, one sort of moral nihilism is known as moral error theory. The error theorist is committed to the position that our positive moral sentences genuinely attempt, but always fail, to describe the way things are. A positive moral sentence is any sentence that, if true, would imply the existence of at least one moral feature or property. So, the error theorist believes that we are always speaking in error anytime we speak in ways that imply the existence of moral features or properties. Another version of nihilism would be some type of expressivism. Unlike the error theorist, the expressivist is committed to the position that our moral sentences do not even attempt to describe the way things are. For the expressivist, anytime we use moral talk, we are doing something other than attempting to describe. For example, the expressivist might think that when we say murder is morally wrong, what we are really doing is expressing our disdain or disgust for murder, like we would be doing if we said, "Boo murder." Or the expressivist might think that when we say murder is morally wrong, we are expressing a command, or are attempting to influence certain behaviors, like with the expression, "Don't murder." Either way, "boo murder" and "don't murder" are not the kinds of sentences that are capable of having a truth value. Despite the fact that many nihilists identify as expressivists, there are some problems facing expressivism that the moral error theorist does not face. First of all, if expressivism is true, then even if we think we are trying to describe the way things are when we use moral talk, we are not actually doing so. Expressivism is not primarily about how we should interpret moral talk, but is about describing how moral talk actually functions. It also seems to follow from expressivism that we also don't have any moral beliefs at all. Since moral sentences are not the kinds of things that can be believed. I cannot believe it to be the case that "boo murder" any more than I can believe it to be the case that "don't murder." For error theorists, on the other hand, people do have moral beliefs, but it's just that all of our moral beliefs are mistaken. However, there is a deeper problem for expressivists that can be illustrated with the following argument. Premise 1. If moral nihilism is true, then there are no genuine moral properties or features to the world. That's obviously true. That just follows from the truth of nihilism. Secondly, if there are no genuine moral properties or features to the world, then any sentence that denies the existence of genuine moral features or properties is true. Thirdly, if a sentence of the form, "it is false that P" is true, then P must have a truth value. So, if moral nihilism is true, then for any positive moral sentence P, "it is false that P" is true. 5. If it is the case that for any positive moral sentence P, "it is false that P" is true, then positive moral sentences must have a truth value. Conclusion. So, if moral nihilism is true, then positive moral sentences must have a truth value. But if positive moral sentences must have a truth value, then expressivism must be false. Now here what the expressivist would need to do is argue that there is a distinction between a sentence not being true and a sentence being false. "Boo murder" is not true, precisely because it is not the sort of thing that can be true. But it doesn't follow that "boo murder" is false. It's also not the kind of thing that can be false. So what the error theorist and the expressivist debate about is what it means to say that our moral sentences are not true. Error theorists take this as meaning that they're false, whereas expressivists just say, nope, they're not true, and they're not false. I'm not going to focus any more on this debate, so for now let's turn our attention to error theory. Suppose you are having a conversation about ethics with a friend of yours, and this friend identifies as both a moral error theorist and a nihilist. You find yourself intrigued, so you ask your friend, "Do you believe that Hitler was a good man?" In response, your friend says, "No, I believe that Hitler was not a good man." Since your friend denies that Hitler was a good man, you take it that what your friend means is that Hitler was actually evil. You then say, so you must believe that Hitler was an evil man. If your friend were a consistent error theorist, they would say, no, I also think it is false that Hitler was an evil man. So what exactly is going on here? First of all, Hitler was a good man and Hitler was an evil man are both positive moral assertions. Although being morally good and being morally evil are contrary moral properties, it nevertheless is the case that they are both moral properties. However, Hitler was not a good man and Hitler was not an evil man are both sentences that deny that Hitler has those relevant moral properties. What we need to keep in mind is that denying that something is morally good does not imply that something is morally evil. Denying that something has one moral property does not imply that it does have some contrary moral property. It is possible for some things to be morally neutral. Well, every moral nihilist, regardless of whether they are an error theorist or an expressivist, would simply say that all reality is morally neutral. So, even though you and I may mean that something is actually evil when we say that it is not good, this is just an assumption we are making about what our moral language is actually doing. So, the lesson we can learn here is maybe we shouldn't be making that kind of assumption. Something else we need to keep in mind is that we use words like good and bad in non-moral evaluative ways, and these ways of using such terms does not imply the existence of any genuine moral features or properties. For example, let's say you go to an Italian restaurant with friends to enjoy some pizza. Upon eating the pizza, you say, "Yum, this is good pizza." While it may appear as though you are saying that the pizza has some genuine moral property, upon closer examination, it is reasonable to believe that this is not what you are actually doing when you use language this way. Usually when we say, "this is good pizza," what we really mean is that pizza satisfies some desire that we have, or that the pizza fits in with some type of conventional standard or expectation. But such expressions, "eating the pizza satisfies some desire that I have," and "this pizza fits with conventional expectations or standards regarding pizza," do not imply the existence of any moral features or properties at all. So if these types of expressions can be explained in these kinds of ways, then these expressions do not imply the existence of any moral features or properties. So if your error theorist friend were eating pizza with you and agreed, and said, yes, this is good pizza, your error theorist friend would not be doing anything inconsistent with their commitment to nihilism. Now let's turn our attention to reasons for accepting moral nihilism. First and foremost, we need to recognize that moral facts constitute a type of theoretical entity. A theoretical entity is the sort of thing that is unobservable, and yet it plays a necessary role in some explanation. An example of this would be electrons and other theoretical particles of physics. We have never directly observed such things, but we nevertheless postulate their existence and the sorts of features that they have because of the explanatory role that they play. With respect to theoretical entities, many nihilists are committed to some versions of Occam's razor, which says that we do not postulate the existence of theoretical entities unless they are indispensable in some way, meaning that we are unable to explain things without them. That being said, here is a type of Occamist argument for nihilism. Premise 1. We need to postulate the existence of moral facts only if they are indispensable in explaining some aspect of human behavior or in explaining human attitudes about morality. Premise 2. We do not need moral facts to explain any aspects that are relevant to human behavior or human attitudes about morality. We can explain human behaviors and human attitudes about morality without moral facts. Conclusion. Therefore, we have no need to postulate the existence of moral facts. Here is an example that will illustrate this argument. Suppose you are out in public doing some people watching, and you are observing the ways in which two romantic partners are interacting with each other. You see them smiling at each other, kissing each other, holding hands, helping each other perform tasks, and the like. After a while, you approach the couple and ask them questions about the nature of their relationship. On the basis of witnessing their interactions with each other and upon hearing what they say about each other, you discover that all the following are true. 1. These two individuals have a fond affection for each other. 2. These two individuals desire to promote each other's welfare. 3. These two individuals genuinely believe that they are obligated to promote each other's welfare. Now, after drawing these conclusions about this couple, you then begin to speculate about which of these features actually explain the sort of interactions that you witness between them. But if it is the case that 1, 2, and 3 are sufficient to explain their behavior, then what role does their actually being obligated to promote each other's welfare have to do with it? If these two individuals would be interacting this way, regardless of actually being morally obligated to, then moral obligation has no role in explaining their behavior. And that is exactly the nihilist's point. When we explain human behaviors, we explain them in terms of environment, desires, beliefs, and those kinds of things. We don't appeal to actual facts of obligation or any other kind of moral fact to explain our behavior. Now, we may be able to say that the belief that they are morally obligated plays a role in explaining their behavior, and it most likely does, but our beliefs do not need to be true in order to influence our behavior. We act in accordance with mistaken beliefs quite often. But if the actual existence of moral facts doesn't explain something relevant to moral behavior or moral belief, then we have no need to postulate the existence of moral facts. Now, what are some ways of responding to nihilists' concerns? According to philosopher and avid pipe smoker G.E. Moore, one way of responding to any sort of skeptical scenario is to appeal to our most basic intuitions. This strategy came to be known as the G.E. Moore shift, which is either a philosophical move or the latest dance craze sweeping the nation. Here's how this would work in the context of moral nihilism. So let's begin with a nihilist argument. Premise 1. If moral nihilism is true, then there is nothing morally wrong with lighting children on fire for fun. Premise 2. Moral nihilism is true. Conclusion, therefore, there is nothing morally wrong with lighting children on fire for fun. This is a deductively valid argument, meaning that if both premises are true, the conclusion follows. However, if you think that the conclusion is false, then it must mean that at least one of the premises is false. The shifted argument would then state the negated conclusion of the nihilist argument as a premise, and then state a negated premise as the conclusion. 1. If nihilism is true, then there is nothing morally wrong with lighting children on fire for fun. This premise would not be the shifted one, because it's obviously true. If moral nihilism is true, then everything is morally permissible, and hence there is nothing morally wrong with lighting children on fire for fun. 2. There is something wrong with lighting children on fire for fun. So this is the conclusion of the nihilist argument, just negated. Our conclusion would then be, therefore, moral nihilism is false. So this is the second premise of the nihilist argument, just negated. After seeing the original argument and the shifted argument, we then make a determination about which one we find more reasonable. As far as G.E. Moore is concerned, given our basic moral intuition that it is morally wrong to light children on fire for fun, any successful argument in favor of nihilism would need to be more reasonable than that basic moral intuition. And G.E. Moore just doesn't think that there is any such argument available. Or at least, that would have to be one hell of an argument. Another important question is why we should think that moral facts ought to explain human attitudes and human behaviors at all. This question directly undermines the Occamist argument. It seems that there are plenty of other types of normative facts that we accept, even though those types of normative facts don't explain human behaviors or attitudes either. For example, we commonly accept epistemic norms, such as 1. We ought to proportion our beliefs to the best available evidence. 2. We ought not be willfully ignorant. Or even 3. We ought not postulate theoretical entities beyond what is necessary for explanation. So, even Occam's razor can be expressed as an epistemic norm. But what does Occam's razor, if true, actually explain? Nothing. So if it is reasonable to accept all of these, despite the fact that they don't explain anything, why should moral facts be singled out by the nihilist as being problematic because they don't explain anything? The nihilist probably agrees with something like 1, 2, and 3, or at least agrees with one of them, particularly 3. So given this, let's return to the conversation that you were having with your moral nihilist friend. You ask your friend why they are a nihilist, and they respond by saying that they think nihilism is true, and that there is no compelling evidence for moral realism. So, your friend seems to be motivated by the norm that we ought to proportion our beliefs to the best available evidence. However, you then ask your friend, well, why should we care about what is true, or care about what we can have compelling evidence to accept? In order for your nihilist friend to be consistent, they cannot give you an answer to this question. Your nihilist friend cannot give you any compelling reason for why we ought to care about truth and evidence, because that would imply that these things have some kind of worth. Now, I know that this is a lot to consider and a lot to ponder, but if we do think that truth and evidence have some type of worth, such that we are doing something wrong by failing to care about them, then we do have some reason, at least, to not be nihilists.